All right, so a lot of people have been asking for a lesson on using seventh chords. If you're in the key of E minor, for example, how do you know what seventh chords fit in that key and which ones don't, and whatever. Now, this isn't a particularly difficult lesson, but I'm going to assume you know a few things first. Like you're familiar with seventh chords, you should know what a dominant seventh chord is. And I'll assume you are familiar with how some of the basic chords fit into a key. So if you don't know that in the key of F major you would use a G minor chord, then check the description. I've got some videos on that stuff. So what we'll do is we'll start by looking at a major key. Things are actually fairly simple in a major key in terms of seventh chords. And then we'll start working on a minor key, which minor keys are a little bit trickier. There's some kind of funny things that happen when you're working with seventh chords in a minor key. Now, here's the basic concept here, and it's actually very simple. If I say that I'm in a key, like let's say I'm going to write something in the key of F major, that means that I'm going to be using the notes F, G, A, B flat, C, D, and E, right? That's what I'm saying when I say I'm in the key of F major. So if I want to come up with some seventh chords that fit in that key, I'm just going to be using those notes to create chords. Now, that doesn't mean I can't change keys when I'm writing a song. It doesn't mean that I can't borrow things from other keys and kind of blur the lines between them. But whenever I do that, I'm getting outside of my key. If I want to stay in my key, then I'm just going to be using those 7 notes. So we will look at how you build chords out of those notes here. So our major key, if you remember the pattern, well, you should, you start on the note, go over a whole step, then a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. That's all it is. And in our case, since we're looking at the key of F, then the actual notes would be F, G, A, B flat, C, D, and E, right? That last little half step just takes us back to the root note. Okay. If I want to turn this into chords, let's say I want to take my first note, note number 1, and turn it into a chord. I'm just going to, stack other notes on top of it. And, the pattern for building chords is to skip over a note and put things together in thirds. That distance between these 2 notes is called a third. So that would be an F, an A, a C, and an E, right? All I'm doing is just skipping every other note and just making sure I'm using notes that are in my key. Now, if you look at that and you think about 7th chords, this is a major 7th. It has this, major third, or a major chord beginning part, and have a major 7th on the end. So what that means is that chord number 1, this one, when I'm in a major key, is going to be played as a major 7th chord. And so I'll write that out. And keep in mind, this is the case for any major key. Every major key will follow the same pattern. The relationships are the same. So if we were in G major, you'd be using a G major 7 chord for your first chord. Now, the rest of this is very simple. If you look at the next note, this G, and you work through what notes are in there, you'd have a G, a B flat, a D, and an E. And that's a minor 7th chord. So chord number 2 is a minor 7. Now, I'm going to kind of spoil the ending and just tell you what the rest of these are, because it's easy enough to work through on your own. But the A chord would turn into another minor 7. The B flat chord would be another major 7. Now the C is a little bit interesting, this chord number 5. And you know what, I'll number these so you can kind of think of it that way. Okay, so if you start on this C, you'd have C, E, G, and then a B flat. Now this chord is a dominant 7 chord, which is a bit different. Now if you think about how this chord sounds, it has this very tense, just a tenseness to it. It's this very strong sounding chord. And if you think about the way a key typically works, that's a really good thing. It works out really nicely because in a major key, chord number 5, that's usually a tension chord. It's a chord that has this leading tone in it, that note that's right underneath the octave, and that leading tone really likes to resolve into your root note. So that's a chord we usually use for tension anyway, and when you turn it into a seventh chord, it becomes this dominant 7 chord that has a lot of tension to it. So it kind of beefs up the role that chord was going to do anyway, and it works out, really well. So that's a very powerful 7th chord to use when you're trying to set up these really strong relationships. So again, it sounds like that, and it resolves into that 1 chord. So that is a dominant 7. And remember that the symbol for a dominant 7, like C dominant 7, it just looks like that, like there isn't a symbol there. And then the rest, that D chord, that just becomes a minor 7. And then the E, the basic chord version of this E, is this. It's a diminished chord. When you turn it into a 7th, you're adding on this note, this A. That is a half diminished 7th chord. Keep in mind there's 2 versions of these. Like there's the half diminished 7th, which is this, and there's a fully diminished 7th. When you lower this note even further, you wind up with this. And we'll get to where this chord shows up in a minute. But this is the half diminished 7 chord, and it looks like that little circle with a slash through it. So if I wanted to actually use these chords to create a chord progression, let's say I want to do a really basic one, like 1, 2, 5, 1, I would just, play these different types of 7th chords. So it might look, something like this. Start with this F major 7, and I'm going to put these on. A lot of people have complained that I'll sit here and just like hammer away on a chord and it gets like really annoying. And that's because most of the time I can't really hear myself very well. So sorry about that. I'll try not to do that as much. And I can hear myself now, so shouldn't happen. All right, so you would start on this F major 7 chord, move up to that G minor 7, that's the 2 chord, and then here's that dominant 7, 5 chord, and then back to that one. Now, in real life, when you're really writing music, you usually don't sit there and like just play chords in these big blocky shapes. You'd usually invert them and try to get them to move together a little bit more smoothly. So that might look more like this. I could play this chord here, invert this chord, and the dominant 7 chord, and then back to there, which works pretty well and sounds nice. Okay, so that's the basic idea for a major key, but let's start looking at minor keys, because like I said, it's a little bit trickier there. All right, let's say that we're in G minor. We'll just pick that one. Pattern for a minor key, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, step. Okay, so something like that. And then if we're in G minor, we'll use G, A, B flat, C, D. Okay, so there's our minor key. Now the basic idea here is still the same. You would just start on a G, you'd stack together these notes, and then look at what kind of 7th chord that is. What version of that chord is the one that fits into your key there. So in the case of G, it'd be G, B flat, D, F. That's just this pattern, and that's a minor 7 chord. So chord number 1, minor 7. And we could go through all the other chords, but like I said, it's really just the same process. And if you think about it, when you're looking at a minor key, you have everything that you have in a major key. It's like a major key that's been rearranged, or at least the natural minor version that we're doing here. We'll change that in a second, but everything that's in this key is going to show up here as well. So over here we had 2 major chords, two major 7 chords, 3 minor 7 chords, a dominant 7, and a half diminished 7. So in the minor key, those 3 minor 7 chords, this, and this, they're going to show up over here as, oops, I hope that wasn't too loud. They're going to show up here as having a hard time, guys. Okay. They're going to show up here as 1, 4, and 5. So this, and this will be your minor 7 chords. The two major chords, this one and this one, they're going to show up here and here. So chord 3 and chord 6. And then the half diminished 7, that'll show up right here on chord 2. Remember, in the basic chord world, chord 2 is the diminished chord, so it's going to be the diminished 7, or half diminished 7. And then chord number 7, that's going to be your dominant 7. Now, I know this feels like a lot to remember, but if you look at the patterns, it really isn't that bad, especially if you already know what the basic chords look like. So for the major key, you're in the basic chord world, you're 1, 4, and 5. Those are just major chords. When you turn them into 7th chords, all of them turn into major 7ths, except for chord 5, which is the dominant chord. So the dominant chord turns into a dominant 7th chord. That's easy enough to remember. The minor 7 chords, the 2, 3, and 6, sorry, I said that wrong. The minor chords, 2, 3, and 6, they just turn into minor 7th chords. And then your diminished chord turns into a half diminished 7th. Really not too bad. And then in the minor chord world, in the basic chords, 1, 4, and 5 are minor chords. They just turn into minor 7ths, easy enough. The major chords, 3, 6, and 7, they all turn into major 7ths, except for this last one, the 7 chord. That becomes your dominant 7. And then the diminished chord, chord number 2, turns into the half diminished chord. So really, really not too bad, especially if you're used to the basic chord stuff. But like I said, things do get kind of strange with the minor key. There's a couple reasons for that. I'll go ahead and get rid of this so it's not quite as cluttered. All right, so you might notice a couple things right off the bat. For one, the chord number 5 here, I'll label these 4, 5, that D chord. That's just a minor 7 chord. Oh, Q or G. That D chord is just that. And that's a great chord, but often enough, you want tension in that key. You want the 5 chord to have this tension that resolves back to the 1 chord, and that definitely doesn't happen there. It's just this very mellow minor 7 sounding chord. So what you'll often do is, instead of using the notes exactly like this, you'll use a harmonic minor scale, which all that means is that you scoot this note over, and instead of an F natural, you'd play an F sharp, which is this note. That's kind of the harmonic minor, altered version of the scale, and you'll see that happen all the time. So what that does, it does two things, and they're both kind of cool, is that if we play that D chord, this one, by changing the F into an F sharp, we're doing this, and that gives us that leading tone. It gives us a note that wants to resolve into our root note, that G. So it gives it that tension, but it also morphs this minor 7 chord into a dominant 7 chord, which is exactly what happened in a major key, and it's a chord that has that tension that wants to resolve to the root note, or the root chord, right? So that kind of changes the way that chord functions in a way that is often something you really want. Now, of course, keep in mind, it really just comes down to what you're trying to do when you're writing music. You'll hear plenty of music that uses a minor 7 for the 5 chord and this very mellow kind of sound, and if that's what you want. Or you can turn it into that dominant 7 chord, which in scale terms means you're using that harmonic minor scale, and that gives you that strong tension resolution thing. So that would mean that this morphs into that dominant 7. Now, one of the other odd things about this minor key is that chord 7, this F chord, in the natural scale version, this is a dominant 7 chord. But it doesn't have a leading tone that resolves to our root note. It actually sounds like it wants to resolve to the B flat, to that 3 chord. And this is why if you're just kind of playing around with chords like this, you might find yourself in weird scenarios where if you play that F dominant 7, this one, and then like say you were to play that, what did I say, that B flat chord, it sounds like you just did a tension resolution thing to B flat, which is fine if you're trying to turn B flat into your key center. But if you're not, if you're intending to write something in the key of G minor, that can be really weird and kind of mess up the way the music sounds, because suddenly like you just turn into a major key when you thought you were just playing some of the 7th chords out of your key. One of the weird quirks of minor keys. So be aware of that. And if you use the harmonic minor scale version of this instead, if instead of playing the F dominant 7 chord, if you scoot this over to be an F sharp, so instead of that, you do this. That is how you get the fully diminished 7th chord. You know, that one, get around this mic here. That would be that one. Which is kind of a cool sound because it's not a chord that shows up very often when you're just using the normal major scale or minor scale. So it's a cool sounding chord. And it's something you can use to, get that tension resolution back to your G minor chord, like that. So that's a really cool variation when you're making this little adjustment to the scale. So anyway, here's a quick example of a chord progression. Let's say I'm going to do a 1-4-5-1 progression in this G minor key. It would look like this. You'd have your G minor chord. Now, I'll go ahead and invert these because, like I said, that's usually what you do. And there's our C minor 7. And then for the D chord, like I said, often enough you would want to use the dominant 7 version. So that would be that. You can hear that tension and then resolve back to the G minor. And that's pretty much it. But like I said, just watch out for some of those things that can happen in your minor key and realize especially that your 5 chord is something you're going to often enough kind of switch between the mellow minor 7 version or the dominant 7 version of that chord. Okay, so I think that's it for now. Again, a huge thanks to my patrons for funding this. We just hit like the first major goal, which means that now I am not working my day job anymore on Mondays. I am just doing YouTube content, which I am super excited about. And again, I just can't say thanks enough for that. So if anyone else is interested in helping fund things and move me more towards doing more content, then check that out. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Please send your ideas. I am purely running off of you guys' suggestions at this point, so please keep them coming, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.